Under the blood-soaked sky of the Sengoku era, where warlords battled for supremacy, loyalties shifted like the wind, and the blade was the only law. Tokugawa Ieyasu did not step onto the stage as a flamboyant conqueror. He waited patiently, calculated quietly, and step by step turned chaos into order. Not as dazzling as Nobunaga, nor as daring as Hideyoshi, yet it was he who laid the foundation for over 2 centuries of peace, a golden age known as the Edo period, whose legacy still echoes to this day.
The article below has been compiled from many sources. If there are any mistakes, or if you know any interesting information, feel free to leave a comment so I can learn as well. Now, let's begin the article.
Between chaos and silence, the seed of a shogun. He was not born into an age of order. Tokugawa Ieyasu, known in his childhood as Matsudaira Takechiyo, first opened his eyes on a winter's day in 1543, amidst the bitter winds of Mikawa province. It was not a land of peace, but a battleground where power changed hands as swiftly as arrows flew between feudal fiefdoms. While other children learned to hold fans or recite waka poetry, Takechiyo learned how to stay silent, bow low, and survive. By the age of 3, he had already been taken as a hostage, a living pawn in the political games between the Matsudaira, Imagawa, and Oda clans. And yet, strangely enough, he did not break under confinement. He observed. Quiet as a shadow beneath the trees, he grew up behind foreign walls, studying Confucian teachings, honing his swordsmanship, and learning this one truth. True strength lies not in the roar of battle, but in the ability to wait for the precise moment to strike. In an age of war where destiny belonged to those who dared to wield a blade without flinching, the seed of a shogun did not grow through bloodshed, but through a will sharpened in silence day after day. No one called his name as a successor. No one saw the brow of a future ruler in the boy Takechiyo. But like a hidden spring deep beneath the earth, quiet and resolute, he was gathering strength for a day yet to come. No one could have foretold greatness from a child traded like a game piece. Yet in a world where trust was a rare and fading currency, Tokugawa Ieyasu began his journey with a power no one could measure, the power of patience. In the shadow of another, a sword without a name. At the age of 15, Takechiyo took a new name, Matsudaira Motoyasu, a name for a new life, lived under the banner of Imagawa Yoshimoto. He was no longer a child traded like political cargo. He had become a retainer, yet a retainer to a man with ambitions that reached far beyond provincial borders. Yoshimoto, the powerful lord of Suruga, dreamed not just of securing his lands, but of marching all the way to Kyoto, the imperial capital. In that grand design, Motoyasu was merely a piece on the board, small but useful. Under the Imagawa, he learned how to govern, how to march an army, how to command and obey. But more importantly, he learned how to survive without revealing himself. He fought, he won battles, he earned merit, but never rushed to claim rewards. Every victory was a test, every defeat a lesson. While others drowned themselves in the intoxication of glory, he quietly gathered the one thing no one could steal: vision. Then came 1560, and destiny shifted. Yoshimoto marched a massive army into Awari, only to be ambushed and beheaded by a bold young warlord, Oda Nobunaga, at the Battle of Okehazama. And for the first time, Motoyasu stood at a crossroads. Continue serving a headless clan or seize his own fate. He chose a third path, not rebellion, not allegiance, but withdrawal. He pulled his troops back to Mikawa and re-established the Matsudaira house, independence burning within him, though he spoke not a word of it. It was a turning point. The boy who had once been a hostage was now the true master of his homeland. But he did not rush into the great game of power. Before dreaming of empire, he laid his foundations. Before speaking of all Japan, he secured Mikawa. The name Ieyasu had yet to be spoken, but the spirit of Tokugawa, the future shogun, was already taking shape in those years he spent bending beneath the shadow of another. Breaking the chains, blood and fire, in Mikawa. When Motoyasu returned to Mikawa after the death of Imagawa Yoshimoto, he did not return as a fugitive, but as the rightful heir reclaiming his ancestral land. Yet Mikawa was no longer a land of quiet obedience. Petty lords and once loyal clans began to raise their heads, demanding autonomy. And worse still, the shadow of religion began to stir. The Iko-Iki sect, zealous followers of the Jodo Shinshu, true Pure Land school, had long rooted themselves deep within the local populace. They carried no samurai swords, but wielded their faith like spears, ready to burn down the old feudal order. Mikawa became a furnace, not of clan rivalries, but of peasant monks chanting the name of Amida Buddha while swinging axes at samurai. Motoyasu, by then beginning to bear the name Ieyasu, was forced to choose: show mercy to the rebels or crush them to restore order. He chose without mercy. The Iko-Iki uprising was stamped out in a campaign soaked in blood. Temples became fortresses, and then ashes. The man who had once been a hostage, who had lived under the grace of stronger lords, now became the one to burn down the faith of others, to build a government truly his own. And in the midst of blood and fire, a symbolic decision was made. In 1566, Motoyasu officially adopted the surname Tokugawa, reviving an ancient noble line to which he claimed descent. The name Tokugawa Ieyasu was no longer just a name, it was a declaration that from this moment forward, he would live in no one's shadow, no longer a hostage, no longer a servant, no longer Imagawa's subordinate. He was a daimyo in his own right, and more than that, a man beginning to look beyond Mikawa, toward Kyoto, toward a fractured realm that shimmered like a broken mirror. The one who chose to sit beneath another, a plot spanning 3 generations. When Oda Nobunaga began to set the realm ablaze with his campaign to seize Kyoto, many daimyo chose to defend their own turf or resist outright. But Tokugawa Ieyasu did the opposite. He sought alliance. A man who had only just shattered the chains binding Mikawa now willingly stood in another's shadow, declaring himself the vassal of a younger, more reckless lord, surrounded by enemies on all sides. To many, it seemed an act of weakness, but to Ieyasu, it was strategy. He understood. This fractured land was not yet ready to follow a quiet man like himself. To survive, and more importantly, to observe, he needed a fire brighter than his own to draw the eyes of the world away. Oda Nobunaga was that fire. Their alliance was both firm and fragile. Nobunaga rampaged westward, setting Kyoto aflame, annihilating warrior monks on Mount Hiei, and crushing the old families. Ieyasu, meanwhile, strengthened the rear, silently expanding his power in the east, suppressing scattered rebellions, planting the seeds of a rigid, efficient system of governance. He built fortresses, trained soldiers, regulated taxes, as if every move was in preparation for a day no one dared to expect, the day that great fire would burn out. And that day came. In 1582, Oda Nobunaga was betrayed by his own retainer, Akechi Mitsuhide, and burned alive within the Honnoji temple. The entire realm trembled. A rising empire had lost its master overnight, and eager hands reached out to seize what remained. Yet in the midst of this upheaval, Tokugawa Ieyasu did not rush forward. He did not charge into the chaos at the heart of power. Instead, he stepped back, keeping far from the storm, letting others bleed in the scramble. That was how he survived, and that was how he waited. The period after, Nobunaga, concealing himself and preparing for a return. In 1582, the Honnoji incident sent shockwaves across the nation. Oda Nobunaga, Tokugawa Ieyasu's most powerful ally, was betrayed and assassinated by Akechi Mitsuhide. The news spread rapidly throughout Japan, plunging the already chaotic political landscape into deeper turmoil. Ieyasu, who was near Osaka at the time, suddenly found himself in a perilous position. Not only had he lost his greatest partner, but he now faced the risk of being attacked by rival forces while in a vulnerable state. Rather than rushing into revenge, Ieyasu made a wise and calculated retreat. He returned to Mikawa by a roundabout route, carefully avoiding any direct conflict in order to preserve his strength and position. This patience and composure once again revealed the nature of a man not easily cornered. Meanwhile, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a brilliant general under Nobunaga, swiftly crushed Mitsuhide's rebellion and rose to power. Hideyoshi began expanding his influence, gradually unifying the country. But for Ieyasu, this marked a new challenge: to confront Hideyoshi openly or to seek some form of cooperation. Their clash came in the battles of Komaki and Nagakute in 1584. Though neither side achieved a decisive victory, both leaders understood that a prolonged war would only bring heavy losses. In the end, they reached a peace agreement. Ieyasu would retain his territories and autonomy, and in return, he would become Hideyoshi's ally in a carefully calculated balance of power. While Hideyoshi solidified his control and expanded into other regions, Ieyasu quietly built his own strength, preparing for the day he might shoulder the fate of Japan. Through patience and strategy, Tokugawa Ieyasu gradually transformed himself from a loyal ally into an unignorable force on an ever more complex political chessboard. Bowing once more, only to rise even higher. When the news of Oda Nobunaga's death roared like the last thunderclap of the season, the realm trembled. Those who had once bowed before Nobunaga now raised their heads in unison, scrambling to seize the smoldering remnants of power left in the ashes of Honnoji. A new era of transition had begun, more dangerous, more ruthless, and not for the impatient. At that time, Tokugawa Ieyasu was in Sakai, perilously close to Kyoto, where the rebellion had just erupted. With the forces he commanded, he could have marched straight into the imperial capital or, at the very least, demanded his share of Oda's crumbling inheritance. But he didn't. He chose the longer path, the harder road, the one fraught with more traps. He returned to Mikawa. Some called it cowardice. But as in times past, Ieyasu understood. Japan was not yet ready to be his. In order to survive and grow stronger, he bowed once more, this time to Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the man who had avenged Nobunaga and swiftly seized leadership of the coalition. Hideyoshi, the son of a peasant, bore no noble lineage, but was a genius in winning hearts and commanding loyalty. He accepted Ieyasu's submission, but never truly trusted him. Ieyasu, on the other hand, pretended to accept everything, even the command to relocate to Edo, a desolate swamp in the east. Yet it was in that swamp that Tokugawa Ieyasu began to build his empire. He was no longer a mere vassal. He became the architect of the Kanto region, founded the city of Edo, laid out rice fields, and took control of rice production, the true source of power in that age. While Hideyoshi busied himself with campaigns in Kyushu and Shikoku and pursued dreams of invading Korea, Ieyasu patiently consolidated the rear, negotiated political relationships, and, most importantly, observed every crack in the empire Hideyoshi hadn't yet sealed. He bowed, but not out of weakness. He bowed because he knew, in the fiercest storms, it is the roots that bend that endure. When the guardian fell, the patient one struck. In 1598, Toyotomi Hideyoshi passed away. His death was more than the end of a man. It was the beginning of the unraveling of the entire order he had painstakingly built. To safeguard his legacy for his still young son, Hideyori, Hideyoshi had created a council of 5 regents, among whom Tokugawa Ieyasu was included. In name, the 5 lords would jointly preserve peace and protect the Toyotomi heir until he came of age. But the world has little room for pure loyalty, especially when power rests in the hands of a child. Ieyasu, who had remained silent for over 2 decades, began to speak. Slowly, without fanfare, he quietly forged ties with powerful daimyos, strengthened his control over eastern Japan, and skillfully arranged alliances through marriage, gold, and promises of peace. Ishida Mitsunari, a court official fiercely loyal to the Toyotomi, saw danger in Ieyasu's quiet rise. He gathered the Toyotomi loyalists and raised a Western alliance under the banner of defending Hideyori. But righteous cause alone was not enough, and strength, they had little of it. In the year 1600, the 2 forces collided at Sekigahara, a mist-shrouded plain chilled by cold wind. The battle was no sudden eruption. It was the climax of a game of strategy meticulously played in silence. Ieyasu did not win with the sword alone. He won with time, with secret pacts arranged well before the first clash of steel, pacts with key commanders in Mitsunari's ranks, who turned their blades mid-battle, tipping the scales irreversibly eastward. Blood was spilled, but not as much as people imagined, because most of it had already been decided in shadows. This was not a battle of heroic charges, but a confrontation of strategy, of patience, of one who knew that the final victor need not strike the first blow. Sekigahara closed. The realm opened, no longer to the house of Toyotomi, but to Tokugawa. The throne none dared to claim, and the man who stepped forward. After the victory at Sekigahara, the skies over Japan were still far from clear. Remnants of the Toyotomi clan remained, whispers of loyalty still lingered, and skeptical eyes watched the shifting tide. But Tokugawa Ieyasu, the man who had waited nearly 50 years, knew one thing with absolute clarity. For peace to truly settle over the land, something had to be placed upon the throne. Something that would command not only respect, but fear. 3 years after that decisive battle, in 1603, he received an imperial mandate from the emperor, officially becoming Sei Tai Shogun, the great general who subdues the barbarians. He was not the first to hold that title, but he would be the last to give it eternal meaning. Edo, once a quiet fishing village under his control, was raised to the status of de facto capital, marking the beginning of the Tokugawa Shogunate. But he did not rule through brute force alone. He engineered a society where everything had its place. Clearly defined classes, a tightly woven feudal order, and a clever system of surveillance. The daimyo, feudal lords, were bound by sankin kotai, a policy that required them and their families to take turns residing in Edo, hostages in fine clothing. He did not kill, he bound. With laws, with ritual, with the unseen hand of control. He forged a Japan that turned inward, not out of fear but in defense of stability. Foreign trade was strictly limited, Christianity was banned, and the borders were sealed. The nation closed itself to the world, not to wither, but to breathe, to endure, to gather strength until the day it could face the world again. To Ieyasu, glory was not found in a single dazzling battle, but in preventing the many that could have followed. He lived for 13 more years after handing the title of Shogun to his son, long enough to witness the realm at peace, firmly in his grasp. He did not die on the battlefield. He passed away among his trees in Sunpu, like a gardener who had just finished planting the longest-lasting forest in Japan's history. And when he died, no one dared speak. No one dared mourn too loudly, because his legacy was silence, a silence that lasted 2.5 centuries.
Thank you all for following and listening. If you enjoyed and found it interesting, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for our upcoming videos.